this article came out in December of 2017, it seems like everyone now, a lot of folks, are having no problem at all telling us their stories. And I've heard stories of abductions. I've heard of stories of Bigfoot sightings, very up close and personal. And, of course, UFOs galore. People are seeing things all the time and reporting them nowadays. As a matter of fact, one of my clients for the last 24 years, since I am an attorney, has been Peter Davenport, the National UFO Reporting Center. And Peter says that the percentage of reports that he is getting nowadays in the last 2 years, he pegs, is astronomical compared to what it has been in the past. And it's just fascinating for me to be able to involved on the inside of the paranormal. And actually, they call me the paranormal lawyer nowadays because I've been so interested in this for so long. Matter of fact, another client of mine, Dr. Richard Haynes, runs the pilot reporting agency called NARCAP, and he says the same thing. He has a catalog of thousands and thousands of military, commercial, private pilots who report UFOs all the time. And, of course, they don't want to be fired, so they don't want to report them only if they're anonymous. And that's what his agency, NARCAP, does. But it's been fascinating, and every single time that I pass out a card, sometimes I get an instant reaction, or sometimes I'll get a call later. It's fascinating.
So list your sites and where because you do articles, you've got books. Go through that and where people can contact you.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we actually live stream our weekly meeting on Monday nights live from Denny's, where America eats. So they can go to UFO I-Team on Facebook and actually join the meeting. And they can text us and message us online. We have communications on a weekly basis with people from the UK, from Eastern Bloc countries, and Australia, and those kinds of things. So we try to get ourselves out there and be very visible to people who are interested in this subject. So UFO I-Team on Facebook and or UFOIteam.com on the internet.
And you have a radio show as well.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for allowing me to plug that. I am on Night Dreams Radio, by the way. That's Saturday nights is my show from 7 to 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And all you do is you go to nightdreamsradio.com. Gary Tombstone Anderson is the board op and the owner of the station, and he has his show 5 days a week from 8 to 10 p.m. And, of course, mine is on Saturdays from 7 to 10 p.m.
Now, we have some conspiracy people listening. You told me a story today a little bit about Bob Bigelow, and it's not that big a conspiracy story, but can you go through that story about your role in getting Peter's name put back in the government files there?
Yeah, well, this was, about 20 years ago, and of course, Peter and I have been together as a client and a mentor. He's a mentor of mine as well in ufology. But at one point, he called me up in a panic about 20 years ago, and he says, "Hey, you got to help me out here." All of a sudden, my hotline, which has been in every FAA tower in the United States and all of the FAA manuals, as someone to call if people see a UFO, because let's face it, if someone sees something very dramatic, they will call their local airport and talk to somebody in the tower or try to report it. And they referred them to the National UFO Reporting Center for 20 years before that. And then all of a sudden, Robert Bigelow comes in and decides to purchase the FAA manual and try to update it, he says, for them. And what happened was that he put his NIDS scientific agency in there as far as the people that they should call if they have a UFO report. And, of course, Peter's number was dropped right out of there like a hot rock. So it took me about a year and a half to be able to haggle with the FAA and the Air Force to point out the constitutional problem with equal protection and not allowing only one agency like NIDS as a private organization to be in the FAA manual. So we ended up getting Peter back into the FAA manuals all over the country and indeed all over the world. The UFO hotline that he has is 206-722-3000. And of course, if you have anything, even a historical sighting, he would like to hear from you.
Now, you spend a lot of time working with Peter. Can you tell me, has there been a change in sightings over, say, 20 years from then to now? And can you give us maybe one or two little highlights of stuff that has happened in the last little while that people might not know about?
Yeah, of course. There is a lot of activity going on. Matter of fact, one of the things that Peter has said is that there is a class of UFO sightings that have kind of dominated all the sighting reports lately, and that are those orange fireballs that don't seem to come down as meteorites and hit the ground. Typically, they'll streak across the earth in a horizontal pattern and just keep going. No sound. Some will even have a flaming tail behind them. But the orange fireballs have seemed to be becoming very popular in the last 2 or 3 years. But the most exciting thing that he's been reporting lately is Peter appears on my Saturday show on Night Dreams Radio and gives us the new updated sighting reports each week. And he is now saying in the last month alone, this would have been September, there were 2 major sightings of alien entities in Oregon, 75 miles apart, and probably only a couple of days apart, where people described at least one case where this gentleman was going to work early in the morning, probably around 6:45. It was light out. It was in September. And he's driving down a 2-lane country road to go to work, and walking on the opposite side of the road in the direction that he is going are these very tall 2 figures that are walking along, and he says there's no sidewalk. There's hardly anybody on these roads ever. And these 2 people were wearing supposedly skin-tight silver outfits with knee-high black boots and some kind of a vest, he said. And they're both dressed the same, walking kind of awkwardly, he said, down the highway. He slowed down and didn't want to stop because they looked so strange. But when he tried to take a look at their faces as he came up to them and came broadside, both of them immediately turned their faces away from him simultaneously. And he kept on going. But he says that was the strangest thing he ever saw. And this was in Newberg, Oregon, in the middle of September. So that seems to me that Peter says that this is a new thing happening where actual alien entities are being reported to the National UFO Reporting Center.
A question I'd like to ask you, and maybe ask Dave as well. You were a lawyer, and Dave was a radio talk guy, a radio journalist. And I don't know if you probably discussed it, I've forgotten. How did you get down this rabbit hole? So I'll ask Michael first and then to Dave.
Yeah, it's a popular question about how people actually get started in the paranormal. You know, it seems to me that I've always been interested in this subject. Well, before I became an attorney, I've been an attorney now for 30 years. But before that, even as a kid, I don't point to a specific event that happened in my life. I was always interested in reading the stories from Fate magazine, you know, some of the books by some of the original old-time authors, you know, about the incident at Exeter and, you know, the Fortean activity from Charles Fort's books. And so when I became an attorney, I decided, well, I was going to do some pro bono work for some of the UFO agencies that I knew about. MUFON, for instance, I joined that. I was a member of APRO back in the mid-'70s, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. Jim and Coral Lawrenson were running that back in the old days. And so I kind of got hooked and decided, hey, well, there's a way that maybe I can help some of these organizations with their legal work, registering for the 501c3 status and all that kind of stuff. And of course, all sorts of strange things pop up, including me helping Peter Davenport purchase an abandoned Nike missile site in eastern Washington at one point. So you get kind of involved in all sorts of strange activity, even though you're a lawyer.
Dave, you go, and then I'm going to give you a question, so stay there.
Well, for me, I had lived a happily boring life until December 13th, 2011, when I saw...
Remember, lots of people listen to hockey.
Yes, watching hockey. Well, the hockey game was on the television, but I actually saw the angel of death in my mother's eyes. And that was quite a profound moment because I ended up channeling the angel of death. I knew nothing about channeling after that moment or before that moment. And my idea of channeling was sitting in front of my television and flipping up or down on the remote control there. So it was a very big kick in the butt to learn about this experience. And then from there, all of a sudden there started being, I don't want to say psychic visions, but almost like premonitions. And then from there, I saw Bigfoot and UFOs started coming all over the place. Anytime I wanted, I'd have black triangles or translucent orbs over my house in the daytime. It was very, very weird. And then the aliens came.
Yeah. Tell about your main alien that looked in this very window.
No, this was actually at my old house, at my other studio in my old house on April 20th, 2015. And yes, I know that is 420 day. All right. 3 days previous to that, for some reason, the past 3 days leading up to that, I'd forgotten to turn my outside lights on. And I lived in a subdivision. And there wasn't a lot of crime, so I never really worried about it. But we had one of those houses that everybody could show up at any time. The door was always open and the coffee was always on. And so I had recently, I'm now 6 months into Spaced Out Radio, and I'm talking about Buddha, of all topics, with a gentleman named Harvey Kraft. And about 17 minutes into the show, I see something move outside the window. And my studio was right beside my front door. So being at radio, I'm thinking, oh crap, my dogs are going to start barking because I got one of those little yappers that if there's a crosswind, that's 30 minutes of barking. And my dogs didn't start barking. So I turned my chair to look to see who's outside. And when my eyes finally focused, on the other side of my window, about 7 feet away, was an alien gray with large eyes, very bony cheek structure, and, the eye structure where the eyebrows would be, very tiny mouth. And I did what any man would do. I jumped back and screamed in my chair. I nearly fell out of my chair, and boom, he was gone. And in that same moment, I gained my balance, and I stood up, and I looked out the window. And for this entity to take off as fast as it did, if it was human, I would have seen it. There's no way it could have got past my vehicle in my driveway. I could see into my front yard, into my neighbor's yard. I could see everything. And it was gone. Just gone. And that's how, if you listen to Spaced Out Radio, we have the legend of Carl, and Carl has now become our mascot.
I forgot about this. I recommend to people, when I heard, I think it was in San Francisco, I heard you give that presentation. It was just riveting. And I said to people, man, if you want a good presentation by a guy, Dave gives a really good, when he goes through his story of how he got into this and all the things that have happened. Very interesting. So I wanted to, as we're closing down here, I wanted to get into the future, because we discussed this quite a bit at conferences. And we'll maybe start with Dave. Where do you think ufology and the paranormal should go? What can we correct?
I think what we have to do is we have to put the ego aside. Doesn't matter if you're a paranormal investigator, a Sasquatch investigator, sea monster investigator, or a ufologist. I think there is a real type of thread that intertwines and sews all of them together, whether that's consciousness, whether that's something else. I'm a firm believer in all the stories that I have heard that there is correlation between all of the groups that we are investigating. And I think as investigators, we are being way too close-minded that, I'm only going to deal with ghosts, or I'm only going to deal with UFOs, and not even aliens, but just UFOs. It makes no sense. But if you listen to the stories and the people who are having these experiences, Put the proof aside because it's easy to call proof. Listen to the stories. Some of those stories are going to show this thread is sewing everything together.